Man, the energy debate these days, it's a mess.
Yeah, it can
Yeah,
feel like you're wading through a swamp of opinions, like you said, so much data, so many takes. And honestly, it's hard to figure out what's really important.
I mean, we're always hearing about what the future holds for our power grids,
Hmm.
right? And there are two sources that seem to always be in the spotlight. Nuclear energy and solar, obviously, paired with battery storage.
Absolutely. They both get presented as like the answers to a cleaner energy future, but they come with their own unique characteristics, their own sets of challenges, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
That's right, here on the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep, really deep into those two technologies. We'll see where they stand today, what the projections say about their future, growth and costs, see if we can get a clearer picture of how they might shape things going forward.
Sounds good to me.
And it's not just about, looking at the numbers and charts and graphs. We're also diving into how these energy sources are being talked about, in the public sphere. I'm sure some of you out there, you might have come across Shillberg online,
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
this anonymous cartoon turkey who claimed to be like an energy expert. We've been collecting some notes on their public commentary, and we're going to take a closer look at some of their statements. Like, is this perspective lining up with the data, or are we seeing some potential, misrepresentations?
I think what's really interesting here is how information and potentially, misinformation can really shape public perception. And that has huge implications for investment decisions in the energy sector, right?
Big time.
So today's deep dive, well, we've got three main goals in mind. First, we want to lay it all out, a clear comparison between nuclear and this solar plus battery combo. How much energy they're producing now, projections for the future, the costs, the timelines, the trends, everything. Second, we're going to break down some of Shillberg's public statements about these technologies. Look for those moments where things might be, let's say, intentionally skewed.
Skewed, yeah.
And third, we're taking a look at Shillberg's whole online presence, the fact that they're anonymous, any potential conflicts of interest, and ultimately whether this shill label actually sticks.
Right, okay. So let's jump right in. First things first, global electricity.
Yeah.
How's it looking right now in terms of the different sources? What's the breakdown?
Well, right now, when we zoom out and look at the big picture, renewables are holding strong, around 40% of global electricity generation. And a big chunk of that comes from like massive increases in solar and wind capacity. Yeah, like a staggering 700 gigawatts of new capacity that's been added, according to what we've been looking at. And then you've got natural gas. That's contributing around 28%, coal hanging in there around 15%, and nuclear power. It's currently sitting at about 8% of the world's electricity.
So globally, renewables are already a pretty big deal. What about here in the U.S.? How are things looking energy-wise in 2024?
So in the U.S., the top dog is natural gas. It's supplying about 43.3% of our total electricity this year. But we can't forget about those nuclear power plants we've got. The U.S., we operate 95 of them, and they're known for their high capacity factors. What that means is they're running reliably, like a lot of the time, which is important, right?
Definitely.
And just to add some perspective, the U.S., we're a major energy player. Ever since the shale revolution, our energy production has skyrocketed. We've added the equivalent of 2.5 Saudi Arabias in terms of British thermal units or BTUs. And for anyone listening who's like, what's a BTU? Just imagine the heat you get from burning one little match. That's a BTU.
Wow. That really puts it in perspective, the scale of U.S. energy production. All right, so looking ahead now, what kind of growth can we expect for nuclear power globally between 2025 and 2030?
Well, over the next few years, there are a bunch of new nuclear reactors scheduled to go online around the world. Like in China, they've got Tianwan 7, which is a VEER 1200 reactor. That's a Russian design, by the way. Pressurized water reactor with a capacity of, get this, 1200 megawatts.
Oh,
It's expected to be up and running in 2026. And they've also got another one, Chongjiang SMR-1, smaller. It's an ACP-100 reactor, also slated for 2026. India, they're not far behind. Kudankulam 4, another VVER 1000 reactor, also accepted in 2026. And then a little further down the line, in 2029, the UK's got their big project coming online, Hinkley Point C1. It's a large European pressurized reactor EPR design.
so what, a bunch of different reactor types?
Yep. And all in all, based on what we've seen, about 33 new nuclear reactors are expected to be connected to the grid globally between 2026 and 2030.
33. That's a lot of new reactors.
Yeah.
But how does that compare to the growth we're seeing in like solar and battery capacity. It feels like every day there's a new solar farm or battery storage project being announced.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because while we're seeing these new nuclear projects, the growth in solar and battery storage is happening so much faster, like way faster. Remember that 700 gigawatts of new solar and wind capacity we talked about? It just shows you the difference in speed and scale. Renewables are definitely leading the pack in terms of new additions.
Right. Okay. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the economics of it all. What are the levelized costs of energy, or LCOE, looking like for nuclear versus solar plus battery?
Now this is where it gets interesting
Mm.
and a bit complicated. So for nuclear power, the LCOE can really vary a lot. You've got older nuclear plants, those can have an LCOE of something like $140 to $175 per megawatt hour.
Okay, so that's the older ones.
Right. But newer, more advanced reactor designs, those are projected to be more competitive cost-wise. Their LCOEs could be somewhere between $75 and $118 per megawatt hour. But here's the thing, we also have to factor in the cost of potential accidents. What's often called the disaster risk premium. Think Chernobyl, Fukushima. These events can add another like $5 to $40 per megawatt hour to the cost. And
Yikes.
then there's this whole issue of the U.S. Nuclear Waste Fund. It's got a deficit of over $50 billion. That's a potential future cost that could really impact the economics of nuclear power. And then on top of that, dealing with nuclear waste disposal, long term, that's a huge expense.
That sounds like it.
I mean, you've got countries like Finland. They've built this amazing deep geological repository called Onkolo for permanent storage. And Sweden, they've got their own system, KBS3. It's complex and costly, but it has to be done right.
Yeah, it's not a small problem to deal with. So with all those factors for nuclear, what about solar? Solar PV, the panels, and then solar paired with battery storage.
So for utility scale solar PV, the panels, the LCOE is much lower. Typically, it falls between $30 and $50 per megawatt hour.
Way less.
Right. Now, when we look at solar plus battery storage, things get even more interesting. The cost of solar panels has been dropping by around 8 to 15% every year. And for batteries, costs are falling about 5 to 10% annually. So projections suggest that by 2030, the cost of these utility-scale solar plus battery systems could be as low as $6,000 to $7,000 per kilowatt of capacity.
Wow. So given these trends, is there a point in the future where solar plus battery will become more affordable or even cheaper than nuclear for providing that reliable, always-on baseload power?
Based on what we've gathered, the projection is that solar plus battery will become more cost-effective than nuclear for baseload power sometime between 2030 and 2035.
So not too far off.
No, not at all. And this prediction, it depends heavily on those battery costs continuing to plummet and solar efficiency getting even better. The big picture trends are pretty clear, though. The cost of solar plus battery is going down, down, down because of innovation and economies of scale. But for nuclear, the costs are kind of just sitting there or even going up. That's because of all those things we talked about, like complicated regulations, the specialized workers needed, and the long, long time it takes to build a nuclear plant. I mean, our sources don't expect significant cost reductions for nuclear until at least 2040.
Interesting. All right, that paints a pretty clear picture of the economic landscape for both technologies. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about, Shillberg, our anonymous cartoon turkey energy analyst. You mentioned earlier that their take on renewables could be seen as misleading.
Yeah, so from what we've gathered, Shilberg's been a strong advocate for nuclear energy, and advocating for a particular source isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can become a problem when you start portraying the alternatives in a biased or inaccurate way,
Okay.
right? And our sources, they suggest that Shilberg's commentary on renewables, especially solar and wind paired with batteries, has been described as potentially misleading, particularly when it comes to cost, how feasible they are in the real world, and the way they use these straw man arguments against policies that support renewables.
So let's break that down a bit. Let's start with the cost issue. I mean, we just talked about how solar and battery costs are going down. What kind of arguments might Shilberg be making against that, and what's the evidence against those claims?
So Shilberg might argue that, yeah, the upfront cost of solar panels has gone down, but the total cost of solar energy over the long term, especially when you factor in that sunlight isn't always available and you need to make big grid upgrades and have lots of energy storage, well, it's not as competitive as it seems.
I mean, those are valid points. Sunlight is intermittent, and we need storage and grid upgrades.
Right. But the thing is, according to our sources, Shilberg has been accused of making claims about energy metrics that are just not supported by the evidence. It's like they're trying to downplay the progress that's been made in renewables.
How so?
Well, there are reports that Shillberg has said that a country's total energy consumption is the most important sign of economic prosperity. And that's a very simplified view. Many energy analysts would say that's just not true. This kind of framing could be used to make people think that transitioning to cleaner energy sources isn't as important if it doesn't immediately lead to a huge jump in how much energy we're using overall.
Interesting way to look at it. Okay, so what about wind energy? We saw some pretty harsh criticisms in Shilberg's commentary. What's that all about?
Oh, yeah. Shillberg's been very vocal about their criticism of wind energy, like really dismissive. They've even suggested that wind power is on its way out, and they constantly bring up concerns about the environmental impact of wind turbines, especially the challenges of recycling those big blades at the end of their life.
That does sound like a challenge.
It is a challenge, but the counter argument is that these criticisms from Shillberg often lack a full analysis of the costs and benefits of wind power. They don't seem to consider the role wind plays in reducing emissions or the fact that it's renewable. While recycling those turbine blades is a legitimate issue, and the industry is working on it, presenting it as some insurmountable obstacle that negates all the good things about wind, that's misleading.
So focusing on one specific negative without acknowledging the bigger picture.
Exactly. And there are even accusations that Shillberg has incorrectly stated that wind energy is neither green nor renewable, which, goes against basic science.
It's like they're cherry picking.
Right.
You also mentioned those straw man arguments against renewable energy policies. Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Our sources suggest that Shillberg has been accused of using straw man arguments when talking about renewable energy policies in the UK. For instance, there are claims that Shillberg has put the blame for potential future energy shortages and higher costs solely on the Labour Party and their commitments to renewable energy targets. Critics say this ignores the fact that support for renewable energy in the UK has been bipartisan for years. It's not just a Labour Party thing.
So again, ignoring the bigger picture.
Exactly. And they seem to overlook other crucial factors that affect energy security and affordability, like the need for massive investment in grid modernization and how geopolitics are constantly influencing energy markets. By just focusing on this one small part of one party's policies and ignoring everything else, it's like they're misrepresenting how complex energy policy really is and unfairly targeting renewable initiatives.
So this pattern of constantly pushing nuclear while downplaying or misrepresenting renewables, it definitely raises questions about their motivation. Could this be a case of someone trying to manipulate the market?
That's a great question, and it's definitely a possibility. If Shillberg is intentionally spreading misleading information about energy technologies to influence people's investment decisions or even public opinion in a way that benefits one specific sector, well, that could be seen as a form of market manipulation.
I mean, that's pretty serious.
It is. Our notes discuss how individuals or entities could profit from promoting nuclear and putting down its competitors. They could drive up the stock prices of nuclear companies, increase the demand and price of uranium, push for policies that favor nuclear, take advantage of any perceived supply shortages, even create opportunities for arbitrage in the energy market.
So they hype up nuclear and badmouth renewables, even if it's not entirely accurate. And that could potentially lead to more investment in nuclear.
Exactly. They create this narrative that nuclear is the savior, the only way forward, and they downplay the rapid progress and cost reductions in solar and battery storage. It could all be a way to steer investors towards nuclear energy. We even have notes about the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust as an example of how concentrated financial activity can have a major impact on the uranium market. If Shillberg or anyone connected to them has financial stakes in nuclear or uranium, this kind of consistently positive and sometimes very critical messaging could be financially beneficial to them.
So let's talk about Shilberg's reach, anonymity, potential conflicts of interest, and whether they could actually be considered a shill. First off, how far does their commentary actually reach? How influential are they?
So Shillberg actively promotes a subscription-based platform. This means they have a direct line to a dedicated audience. They also appear as a guest on a variety of online platforms, ones that focus on finance, investment, and those big macroeconomic trends. This suggests that they have a pretty substantial reach and the ability to get their views out to a large number of people interested in these topics, including energy.
Okay, and what about the anonymity? The fact that Shilberg operates behind this, cartoon turkey persona. What implications does that have?
The anonymity is a big deal. It allows them to express potentially controversial or, even extreme opinions without having to face the consequences that a public figure might experience. It's like a shield.
I can see that.
But even more importantly, from a regulatory standpoint, anonymity can protect people who might be engaged in activities like market manipulation. It makes it a lot harder for regulators to figure out who they are, investigate them, and hold them accountable if they're profiting from spreading false information.
So it adds a layer of protection for them.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's dive into those potential conflicts of interest. Do we have any information about where Shillberg's financial interests lie? What's their deal?
This is a huge issue. Our sources indicate that there's no public information available about Shillberg's or any associated parties, financial holdings, or investments. We don't know if they're invested in nuclear, renewables, uranium mining, battery manufacturing, anything. And this lack of disclosure is a big red flag. What if they're pushing nuclear so hard because they're secretly invested in that sector?
Mhm.
Or what if they're downplaying renewables while holding short positions or something that would benefit them if renewable energy stocks tanked?
So they could be talking their own book, essentially.
Exactly. Without transparency, it's impossible to know if their statements are based on unbiased analysis or if they're trying to manipulate the market for personal gain.
It definitely makes you wonder.
It does, and our notes even mention the tax credit harvesting in the rooftop solar industry as an example of how financial incentives can influence the narratives that we see in the energy world. So, putting it all together, the pro-nuclear stance, the potentially misleading comments about renewables, the anonymity, the lack of transparency, how do we even begin to assess whether Shillberg is a shill in the classic sense? Like, what are the signs we should be looking for?
To answer that, we need to understand what a shill really is, especially in finance. A shill is someone who promotes a security or asset, like a stock or a bond, but they have a hidden agenda. They want to artificially boost the price for their own financial gain. Now think about Shillberg. They constantly advocate for nuclear energy, often quite passionately. They criticize renewable technologies, sometimes in ways that seem biased or inaccurate. They're anonymous, and we have no idea about their financial interests. All of this raises serious red flags. We even watched this video that defined a shill and talk about how regulatory bodies like the SEC try to prevent market manipulation by enforcing transparency rules. The whole point of securities law is to stop people from using their platform to manipulate markets for their own personal profit, which they're not disclosing. Makes sense. And what are the legal consequences for someone who uses a platform like YouTube to manipulate the market through their commentary? Could Shillberg actually get into trouble?
Oh, yeah, the consequences can be significant. Market manipulation is a serious offense in most places. If you spread false or misleading information to try and change the price of a security, you could face huge fines, lawsuits, even criminal charges. It all depends on how bad it was and what your intention was.
So being online doesn't mean you can get away with it.
Not at all. And Shillberg, they have a potentially global audience. Regulators from different countries could investigate and take action if they find evidence of manipulation that affected investors within their jurisdiction.
So this has been a really fascinating and kind of concerning look at nuclear and solar plus battery and how public commentary can shape what we think about these vital energy technologies.
That's
Before we wrap up, can we summarize the key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Absolutely. Our analysis suggests that while nuclear power is still a major player in the energy mix, and it's expected to grow some, the cost and deployment trends are strongly favoring solar plus battery storage for the future. Solar and battery costs are dropping fast, and they're expected to be cheaper than nuclear for baseload power within the next 10 years.
Okay, so advantage solar plus battery in the long run.
That seems to be the case. And then, of course, we've got Shillberg. We looked at their commentary and found several instances where their statements about renewable energy seem to be misleading or not based on solid evidence. Meanwhile, they're very vocal about their support for nuclear. The anonymity, the potential reach, and the complete lack of transparency about their financial interests are all big concerns. It definitely raises questions about potential conflicts of interest and whether their commentary could be a form of market manipulation, especially since they're not disclosing any financial interests.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this. When it comes to energy, or anything really, be skeptical. Think critically about every source of information you encounter. When you come across strong opinions, especially from sources that are anonymous, ask yourself some questions. What evidence are they giving? Are they ignoring other viewpoints or data? Could the person talking have any hidden financial interests that might be coloring their opinions?
Really important questions.
In this world where information can spread so fast and can influence people's investment decisions, it's more important than ever to do your own research. Verify those claims. Look at different perspectives. That's the best way to protect yourself from misinformation and manipulation, especially in a field as crucial as energy.
Absolutely. That's some great advice. All right, thanks for joining us today on The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.
See y'all next time.